So I've heard a lot of talk and questions recently about the AdvantEdge Plus light bar series, which is often confused with the 4500 series, which is the current front mount light bar for a lot of ambulances in the United States. Previously, it was the 4400 Plus or AdvantEdge Plus or whatever you want to call it. And there's some key differences as far as like the end caps are concerned. 4500 has this full end cap there. 4400 has its own standalone end cap. There's a lot of other differences too, and it's more of a direct replacement, not a continuation of the line. The AdvantEdge Plus shared a lot of features with the actual AdvantEdge light bar, but not all of them. And then you had the Super AdvantEdge Plus, which is a larger version that also had a lot of things in common with the AdvantEdge series, but not everything. And that was actually continued and run simultaneously with the 4500 for some time, not a long time, but a brief time. So I'm going to go over some of the things that went inside of these bars and kind of how they progressed through the years. Check the description for specific time frames. There was some overlap, and there are some catalogs that are a little contradictory out there as well. Taking a look at a few of the rotator modules that the AdvantEdge Plus and Super AdvantEdge Plus utilized. And when I say rotator, I also include some oscillating assemblies that were designed to go into the flush mount light bar series. Showing them kind of in order, taking away the AdvantEdge Plus, Super AdvantEdge Plus for now. The first rotator was this little guy who was in part shared with the responder series, both the mini bar and the light head, and later essentially used in the cadet series beacon. The biggest problem here was that the bulb actually rotates, which means you need a way to get electricity into the rotator head. So there were some brushes, is what they called them, that essentially made contact with copper on the rotating assembly and allowed the rotating assembly to receive electricity. Those were a failure point, so they came up with this little rubber boot that they put around the whole base of it, and it was somewhat effective enough that it could be used in the responder series for a while and then the cadet later, but didn't prove robust enough for the actual AdvantEdge Plus bar. So when that started not working out for them, right around that time, they decided to offer an oscillating line. And what you're looking at there is the oscillating version for the Super AdvantEdge Plus. The rotator head itself would be smaller on the AdvantEdge Plus. Kind of highlighted that a little bit earlier when I first ran through the bars, but it's the same assembly. It's a single rotating unit, or oscillating unit rather, and it's based off of the oscillating unit used in the Pierce Alert, which with the oscillating features turned around could also be put inside the AdvantEdge Plus. If you see, there are actually screw holes there for it, so that it would fit in the tray just like the single oscillating feature. So they went oscillating, and that proved a problem for kind of the same reason as the original rotator. The wires fatigued as they oscillated back and forth, and they would break. So it wasn't very robust, and it didn't last. So what they came out with then was a newly designed reflector, which ended up kind of being mirrored in the actual AdvantEdge bar. And this is the AdvantEdge Super AdvantEdge Plus version. And when they came out with that, they essentially just cut it down and made a version for the regular AdvantEdge Plus. And that's that guy right there. So we went from this to an oscillating assembly to this. And then finally, we went to this, which is an actual shrunk down version of a full-sized AdvantEdge rotator, I would call it, or a little bit more parabolically designed than its predecessor. A little bit more direct beam. And that stayed around for a good amount of time. And then near the end of the lifespan of the light bar, you saw very briefly this rotator come back because they still had the ability to use it. It was still in other products. And it came back very briefly while they were developing the final rotator, which ended up also then showing up in the 4500, which is the bar that replaced it. But you will see some AdvantEdge Plus bars that were manufactured at the very end of the run of the product with this back in them. So you would see these first, and then you saw them again at the end. So that can be a little confusing when trying to date a bar as far as when it came out. So I'm going to pop these guys on. You can kind of see how they work. I'm going to turn on the Super AdvantEdge Plus rotator as well, so you guys can see how they look. They're all decent light sources. There can be some argument as to what exactly was sufficient and what was not. You can even see the base of the rotator made from the cut down of the Super. It has to be set at an angle so that it'll fit. A lot of people actually prefer the original rotator from the standpoint that it was more versatile, a little faster. People claim a more focused beam of light. I don't really think any of the rotators in the AdvantEdge Plus or Super AdvantEdge Plus were much to write home about. I did like the oscillating features. However, they again failed rather quickly, and they were they didn't stay around very long, but I did like them. So that gives you an idea of light output. Again, sufficient, but not overwhelming. Those are 27 watt bulbs, which is, you know, significantly less than a 50 watt bulb you would find in a rotator on a regular light bar. So what we'll do here is I will hook up the oscillating features and we can have a look at those. So here we have the single oscillating module from the Super AdvantEdge Plus and the dual oscillating module that would go in a Pierce alert in the center of an edge bar. These reflectors are turned around the opposite direction because it is meant to be mounted inside an AdvantEdge Plus. They made a smaller reflector for the single unit, which I have in a bar, but I don't have out of a bar. Like I said, I like these. I think you get a nice pop from them. I think they were something that probably could have been improved rather than abandoned. But again, Whelen's thing was strobes, and so they were looking to be passable, I think, on halogen technology, not necessarily dominate it. But again, I don't have one of these out with the smaller rotating head, or oscillating head. It's actually larger than the dual, but smaller than the single for the Super AdvantEdge Plus. You can go over and get a close-up of that unit again. And again, this is kind of what they looked like. Those are your components. Again, failure points are why these were abandoned. But something, you can always tell if an item is supposed to go in an AdvantEdge Plus bar, Super AdvantEdge Plus bar. They always have the same design, which is that little lip and then the screw hole in the back. Pretty much that's the mounting plate for anything AdvantEdge Plus or Super AdvantEdge Plus. So we'll cut over to the bar that has the oscillating unit in it for the AdvantEdge Plus and get a look at that. Same chassis, different reflector. Okay, so here we are looking at the oscillating module in an AdvantEdge Plus. Same exact setup except for the reflector portion. The reflector portion is a smaller reflector. It is very similar to some area lighting pieces, but it has an extra little set of screw holes on the bottom. Again, I thought this was a very effective lighting source, but it did not prove to be extremely durable, which is why it did not last. So there you can see them in action, installed in the light bar. You just get a lot of pop out of those. They hit both mirrors, they cross your plane of sight twice. You get a lot of good off-angle coverage, which was something the AdvantEdge Plus series kind of lacked, especially when it would have a 73 series strobe or halogen at the end. You can see there it's the same module, or the same oscillator module, different light head. We'll go ahead and shut that off and take a little close-up. If you can see there through the fluting of the lens, you're looking at the same thing with just a different reflector on top. And the reflector actually, okay, so it's very similar to a couple of their area lighting reflectors, but it's just a little bit different. If anybody knows what else these were used in, shoot a comment, because I can't find the exact reflector anywhere else. I'm sure it's used somewhere else with all the aviation and industrial, everything Whelen was into. I'm sure it's used somewhere else. They rarely purpose design a single reflector module. Again, that's the oscillating, and they actually usually came as replacements for failed rotating modules. You could order bars with them new, but they were offered for such a short period of time. That was pretty uncommon. So these were often user replacements, and you'd often see them installed incorrectly as well because they were a field modification. So there they are in their natural environment. And like we saw, they're pretty effective. Something I get a fair deal of pushback on, because you really didn't ever see them, is whether or not the oscillating module from the Pierce Alert center portion for an edge was used in these bars. And as you can see by the mounting plate on them, yes, they were. They were an option. They were rarely used. We also see these with different reflectors on them in the short-lived AdvantEdge OSC oscillating light bar. They were used to make the front and rear oscillating modules in that bar with the larger light head on them, much like you see in the Super AdvantEdge Plus. But they would be mounted this way, which is essentially backwards, with the mounting screw holes facing the front of the device when they're in a Pierce Alert, which is the halogen component to the center of an edge. Also pretty effective, but high failure rate. Again, same sort of configuration, but an open top reflector versus the closed top in the single unit, and obviously the dual light head. Again, just the reflectors popped around. So I'll kind of show you what that looks like here. Pretty much the same idea as a Pierce Alert. You're not going to get much better or worse coverage than a Pierce Alert with this. The reflector is a little bit undersized for the product, so that's probably why you didn't see them a lot. But every once in a while, one does pop up in an AdvantEdge Plus bar, or like this, which would like be mounted on the front of an apparatus in place of like a Mars light. That's kind of where you might see them. This one even has the little mirror from the Pierce Alert transferred with it to the AdvantEdge Plus bar. Same idea, different housing. This is the Pierce Alert. Like I said, you can see it's backwards in there. The holes that would go to the back of the AdvantEdge Plus bar are actually facing forward. This is where you see this the most. Again, you see it in the AdvantEdge OSC as well. This is where you would see one the most. And again, it's functioning pretty darn similar to the way it functioned in the AdvantEdge Plus bar. So not an option you saw a lot, at least in the AdvantEdge Plus. And because I mentioned it, there's a view inside an AdvantEdge OSC. That is a dual oscillating unit that would go in a Pierce alert, and that has two large light heads on it, one front, one rear for the AdvantEdge OSC bar. And that's one of the other ways they utilize that oscillating mechanism. Again, not super common, probably the least common place you're going to find that assembly, but another place it is found. You can see the little screw mounting holes there too that would go to the back of a bar when it's used in AdvantEdge Plus. I also did mention that Super AdvantEdge Plus was manufactured alongside of the 4500 that replaced the AdvantEdge Plus very shortly. This is still in the shrink wrap. I'm not going to turn it on, but this is the new, or current almost, if you will, rotator style that would go in other modern Whelen rotating light bars. And there it is, shoved into a Super AdvantEdge Plus, which should have, like we've talked about before, the rotators below, or the oscillating mechanism. The bar below it has both. Like I said, field retrofits. So this bar was retrofitted with a clear oscillating unit and kept its red rotators. The bar above it, a very short-lived Super AdvantEdge Plus that was made alongside of, or right before the 4500, after the regular AdvantEdge Plus was discontinued. A very short amount of time on that. One last thing to ponder about AdvantEdge Plus. This 600 rotator, or Rotabeam 600, actually I don't think they were called that. It was a 64 series at the time. Correction, 64 series rotator is the actual name. The 64 series rotator utilized the one of the later generation AdvantEdge rotators, placing it in a 64 series light head that's a little deeper than normal with a non-optic lens. And again, not real effective. I've done a video on these before, but here's a we can do a video of a clear one here, and kind of show you guys what that looks like. Not super impressive, and not really something that caught on either, but it's another place you might see one of these rotators in the wild. It also kind of reminds us of what might have been if they could have fit an oscillating module in there. So 64 series rotator with the AdvantEdge Plus rotator inside. One more cousin or stepbrother of the AdvantEdge Plus series. Like mentioned, one of the places you could find the AdvantEdge Plus rotators, at least the first generation in the wild, was in the Responder Mini Light Bar series for a while. And then it was continued on in the Responder Cadet for a while after it was discontinued out of other usage. And that's how those late model light bars that went back to the original rotator ended up showing up near the end of the AdvantEdge lifespan, is because they were still making them for the Cadet, like you can see there. So the Responder light bars mirrored the AdvantEdge and the AdvantEdge Plus both at different times in their lifespans. I'll eventually do a video on all the different models of the Responder bars, which there are many, but that's just one last place we can draw some rotator information from. So in summary, yeah, there were a lot of different things that you could put inside an AdvantEdge Plus light bar, but all of them had in common this tray-style mounting system, which had several different versions, but it always had a lip and some spots to run some screws through into the back of the bar. And like I said, the last place you ever saw that was in the Pierce Alert, which would be installed backwards in its Pierce Alert home, or forwards, if you will, in an AdvantEdge Plus. So that's kind of a summary. You've got at least 6, I believe actually 8 total if you look at some other small differences of moving items you could put in an AdvantEdge Plus light bar or AdvantEdge Super AdvantEdge Plus rather light bar. So just a lot of different options. All of them had their pluses and minuses. And all of them were eventually replaced by the 4500 bar, which is still available today with halogen rotators if you so desire. So that kind of wraps up what you'll find in there. Any questions, leave them below. Comments about the light head that's on the dual oscillating, or single oscillating rather, version in the smaller AdvantEdge Plus, the smaller light head version of that. Anybody knows where else that goes, shoot that in the comments as well. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay safe out there, and feel free to ask me any questions or even correct me.